with it.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Happy Halloween and welcome to International Bat Week. Thanks so much for joining us for this celebration of the really important role that bats play in nature and our ecosystems. My name is Melissa Mayhew. I'm a scientist with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, and I'm joined tonight with my friend and colleague, Eric Matchuk from the Toronto Zoo Native Bat Conservation Program. We are obviously not in the frame together because we're observing safety protocols, being out of doors and far apart, so you'll have a chance to meet Eric in a moment. I'd like to begin with acknowledging that we're standing on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. It's also important to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty, which is signed by multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So again, thank you, welcome. We're looking forward to spending the next 15 or 20 minutes with you, talking all about bats. So you can see that we are live this evening from a very special place. We're coming to you from an abandoned building in the Rouge Valley. And this building used to be home to a rather eccentric, wealthy industrialist, but now you're far more likely to see the resident colony of big brown bats here than you are any people. So we're here to celebrate bats. And one of the ways that we're doing that is with the partnership between the Nuclear Waste Management Organization and the Toronto Zoo's Native Bat Conservation Program. So we've joined forces together to research native bat populations in Ontario. And this is really important. You may not realize, but bats in North America, in Eastern North America, the part of the world where we all live, they're really in trouble. And they've been in trouble for quite some time now. So the partnership between the NWMO and the Toronto Zoo is a really natural fit. We're committed to protecting people and the environment, and that environment includes all of the native species that are found within it. So we have a 5-year agreement in place. We'll be investing over $1 million into the study of bat populations in Ontario and supporting outreach and learning events just like this Bats Live event tonight. So with the support of the NWMO, the Toronto Zoo has already initiated a research program that's going to help all of us better understand the ecology of bat species in Ontario and support conservation efforts towards those species. So with that, welcome. And I'm so pleased to introduce Eric to you, who's going to share his enthusiasm and experience with us. So over to you, Eric.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you for the NWMO for setting up this whole presentation. I'm very excited to be here tonight to tell you all about bats and why they're important. As Melissa said, my name is Eric Matchuk. I work at the Toronto Zoo with the Native Bat Conservation Program as a bat biologist. Now, the Native Bat Conservation Program is part of the zoo that we consider the hidden zoo. So it's not the part of the zoo that you'll see when you buy a ticket to visit our site. Instead, we work behind the scenes with wild animals, ones that we can find right here in our own backyard. And as our name suggests, we focus on bats. But we also have a number of different programs, including the Great Lakes Program, the Adopt-A-Pond Program, and the Turtle Island Conservation Program, all working with a number of different fauna across Ontario. Now, as I said, the Native Bat Conservation Program is exactly what the name says. We conserve native bats. And so our mission is to undergo the conservation of native bat species through scientific research by conducting studies to learn about these mysterious animals. But we also want to share that knowledge with other scientists, because if we hoarded all that knowledge, it wouldn't really worth much. We also want to share that knowledge with people like you, the general public, so that they can learn about why bats are so important and why they should care about them. Because generally in the past, bats have had a pretty bad reputation, and we're slowly trying to change the minds of people who think that. Now, today we're going to be talking about the interesting lifestyles of bats, as well as the threats that they face. As Melissa said, they're all in trouble right now, and what you can do at home to help bats get out of that trouble. And then finally, we're going to talk about the partnership that we have going on with NWMO and the work that we're doing in the South Bruce area and across Ontario to learn more about bat populations. So first of all, why are bats super fascinating? Well, I don't have to be convinced. I'm a bat researcher, so I already know that bats are really cool, but I'm going to try and convince you that bats are really, really interesting animals. And the first thing is that bats are the only mammal that can actively fly, which is pretty crazy. I'm sure you've heard of other mammals that you think can fly, like the flying squirrel, but those in fact just glide from tree to tree. Bats can actively fly like a bird can. And you might think that bats are pretty closely related to birds because they can both fly. Well, actually, like I said, bats are mammals. And I have something to show you today, which is a bat skeleton. And if I get close to the camera here, you might be able to see a little bit better. But we're going to look at the anatomy of a bat. And we can see, just looking at their bones, that they're very, very small. And that allows them to get up into the air. Just like how birds have hollow bones that make them lighter, these bats have had smaller bones so that they can get up into the air as well. Now, I want you to look at the wing of this bat, as well as the hand on your own person. So if you look at the two, you can compare just how similar they are. You can see that the wing here almost kind of resembles a human hand. There's got the thumb on the top and then 4 very long fingers that extend down the hand. And in between those finger bones would be a layer of skin called a skin or a wing membrane that allows the bat to fly. Now I also have this picture here that compares a human hand with a bird wing with a bat wing. And you can see that actually the human hand and the bat wing are very much more closely related than the bird wing is. As you can see, birds have feathers, of course, but they also have fused bones throughout their arm that allow them to fly, whereas bats have this kind of hand shape. That's really cool because that means that bats are more closely related to people than they are to other flying animals like birds and insects, of course. Now, because bats are mammals, they do things that we do, just like having babies live birth. They don't have eggs or anything like that like birds do, and they also produce milk. But what's really cool is I know a lot of people think that bats are just like flying mice. They're kind of like rodents. That's not true at all. In fact, bats are more closely related to people than they are to other rodents and mice. Now, bats can live an extremely long time. There have been scientists who have caught bats that are at least 40 years old. That's crazy because usually like mice and rats will only live to a year or two, whereas bats, being as small as they are, can live a much longer time. Now, throughout that life, usually bats will only have about 1 or 2 pups every year. So they're very slow to reproduce. So their population grows very slowly, which is why they live for such a long time, to make up for that decrease or slower rate of reproduction. Now, bats are also extremely diverse. There's over 1,400 species of bats on planet Earth, and that's 1 in 5 mammal species. So 1 in 5 mammal species is actually a bat, which is absolutely crazy. Now, most of these species actually live in the tropics because there's usually a higher diversity in those warmer climates. But right here in Ontario, where it's a lot colder, we still have some species of bats. In fact, we have 8 species of bats, and that makes it really easy for me as a bat biologist because I've memorized all 8 of these species. That's a really easy thing to do. And the 8 species that we do have are the silver-haired bat, the hoary bat, the eastern red bat, the big brown bat, the little brown bat. I know the scientists got really creative there, but that's also called the little brown myotis. We also have the northern myotis, the eastern small-footed myotis, and the tricolored bat. So that's all 8 species altogether. And all of those 8 species eat insects, which makes them insectivorous. That's really great because I don't know if you've been outside in the summer in Ontario, but there are a lot of insects flying around. And we humans consider a lot of those insects pests, especially farmers. They're growing crops, and a lot of bugs eat those crops. But if they have bats flying around, they don't have to use as many pesticides because bats are really just a natural pesticide. So if they have bats on their property that are eating the bugs, they can then grow more crop and then feed more people and get more money. So actually, bats are beneficial to the economy and to our own personal well-being. So bats are very important in that way. Now you might be thinking, well, what about right now? It's getting pretty cold out. I'm not seeing any insects flying around. How do the bats survive? Well, what do they do in the winter? The bats have adapted many different ways to survive through our cold winters. And 3 of the species, the silver-haired bat, the hoary bat, and the eastern red bat, have decided they don't like the cold at all. They're flying down south for the winter. So they're actually migrating. Some of them will migrate as far south as Mexico. Now, there are a lot of Canadians that do that as well. They're called snowbirds. But these ones you could consider snow bats. Now, the other 5 species that we have, they don't like flying that far of a distance. Instead, they've decided we're going to hunker down here for the winter, and they do hibernation. Now, hibernation is where they can drop their body temperature and their metabolism down to such a low level that they're basically just sleeping throughout the night, or throughout the winter, and they don't have to eat while they're sleeping like that. Now, unfortunately, all the species that we have here in Ontario that hibernate are very threatened by one disease called white nose syndrome. Now, white nose syndrome has been devastating populations of bats. And what it basically is it's a fungus that grows on bats in their hibernaculum, so in caves and mines. And this fungus will grow on the soft tissue of the bats, so on their wings or on their noses, on their faces. And it kind of tickles them a lot during the hibernation process, so over the winter. And so they end up waking up a lot more frequently than they normally would throughout this time. And when they wake up, they're using all their energy stores that they've saved up throughout the summer to survive throughout the winter. So they wake up and they start getting really hungry, and they end up leaving the caves or the mines that they're sleeping in to go look for food. Like I said, in the dead of winter, even right now, there's not many bugs flying around, so there's not much food available. So unfortunately, the bats do starve to death. And this has been an absolutely devastating disease. Millions of bats have been affected by white nose syndrome. And in fact, the little brown myotis used to be one of the most common species that you would find here in Ontario, and now it's listed as endangered. So bats are in real trouble because of this disease. And the scariest part is this disease was only introduced to Ontario in 2010. First introduced to North America in 2006. So it's only really been a decade that these bats have had to adapt to this disease. And they haven't been able to very well. Like I said, they're very slow to reproduce. So those populations aren't growing fast enough to combat this disease. But luckily, we are seeing a little bit of tolerance in a few individuals here and there that can survive with this disease throughout the winter. And that's really great because then those individuals that survive can pass on their genes to the next generation. And then natural selection can basically take its course. Now, white nose syndrome, you might be thinking, well, that only affects the bats that hibernate here in Ontario. And the migrating bats that don't sleep in caves and mines, they're doing just fine. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Because migrating bats have to travel such far distances, they go through a lot of different areas. And the number one thing that is causing problems in the migrating species is actually wind turbines. Now, that's really unfortunate because wind turbines are really, really great. They're a really great piece of technology that allow us to use renewable energy to power our cities. But luckily, and unfortunately, the bats that fly into these wind turbines are actually caused by the low pressure that's caused by the wind turbines to be spinning. So they'll actually suffocate before they actually hit the turbine. Now, fortunately, energy companies are very forward-thinking on this, and they're coming up with ways that can protect bats before they get in trouble. Things as simple as turning off the wind turbines at night while the bats are migrating or throughout the migration season. So it's very refreshing to see energy companies that are being so forward-thinking and environmental in their thought processes, such as the NWMO. They're very, very forward-thinking about how we can better the environment. Now, as I said, these bats are in trouble, but it's important that we try and help them. And the number one way that you can help them at home is by building a bat house. I have one with me here today. You can see that this is quite a big bat house. We always recommend the bigger the better. by building a bat house, you're providing a safe habitat for these bats to live in that you can then monitor and submit to scientists to learn where roosts are located. Now, a bat house is really easy to build. As you can see, it's just a couple pieces of wood, some screws, and some glue, and it probably takes maybe a weekend to put together all together. Now, we recommend if you do build one, put it up in the springtime, usually in like late April or so, because that's when the bats are looking for a place to have their babies, called a maternity roost. They won't hibernate in these boxes because they don't stay warm enough. But if you do build one, we always recommend putting it as high up as you can, at least 15 feet off the ground so that it's away from predators or the ground really. And we always recommend also putting it up on a building or on a pole. Avoid putting it on a tree just because branches can get in the way, which cause a lot of shade. And it's important that these boxes are kept warm. So if you put it on a building, make sure that it's facing south so that it gets full day sun. If you live in a cooler climate, you might consider painting it a darker color using water-based paints so that it can absorb more heat throughout the day and keep the bats warm at night. If you want to learn more on how to build one of these bat boxes, there's plenty of resources online. You can check out the Toronto Zoo's website at torontozoo.com/bats to find out more recommendations on how to put one of these up and how to build it. We have blueprints on our website. Now, building a bat roost is excellent because you can then monitor those roosts. And so what we recommend, if you put one up and you do get lucky enough to have bats living on it, we would like to hear about it. You can email us at bats@torontozoo.ca. It's just an email address where we'd like to find out where roosts are, because that's one of the hardest parts about studying bats, is finding out where they're staying. Another really excellent resource, if you do have bats living in your area, is submitting it to a citizen science program called Neighborhood Bat Watch. Now, that's a Canadian program that is based out in Manitoba, and it covers a few provinces. And it basically is an online portal that you can upload these count data of roosts, and then scientists can access it and create studies based on where roosts are occurring and how populations are doing over time. So if you want to check that out, it's www.batwatch.ca. Check that out. It's a really excellent resource. Now, if you do have bats living on your property, it's very important to realize that they are wild animals. And if you see one acting strangely, if it's active during the daytime or if it's crawling on the ground, it's very important not to touch the bat because they are a wild animal and they're going to try and protect themselves, be defensive. And so if you do happen to think that you've been bitten by a bat, you really want to go to the hospital as soon as you can, just because bats can carry diseases such as rabies. And if you get post-exposure vaccine to rabies, you'll be 100% fine. It's very treatable if caught early enough. And that's not to say that every bat has rabies. It's just a precaution in case you think you might have been bitten. It's better to be safe than sorry. If you do find a bat kind of acting weirdly, it's very important to also keep an eye on it. Try not to touch it, and put a box or something on top of it so that you can keep track of where it is. And then call your local wildlife rescue center. I believe there is one in Tavistock in the South Bruce area. A quick Google search can tell you any ones that are more local to you. Like I said, bats are not dangerous animals. They're not going to be seeking you out to try and bite or scratch you. It's more when the animal is acting strangely and they feel threatened that they will then bite or scratch. And again, go to the doctor if that does happen. But there's no reason for a bat to swoop down on you and try and bite you or anything like that. And so that's kind of a little bit of background on the biology of bats, the threats they face, how you can help, and how you can stay safe when working with bats. And so now I'm going to talk about the partnership that we have going on with NWMO and what we've been working on this past summer and this past year on how we can better understand bat biology and behavior and ecology across Ontario. And so over this past summer, we've put up acoustic monitors across the South Bruce area to kind of get a preliminary idea of what's going on in those areas, what species occur there. And that'll inform our future studies and what we're going to do in the future in that area. So I actually have one of these acoustic monitors with me today. You can see it's a very small device. I'll get a little bit closer so you can see better. But basically, it's just like any other sound recording device. It's got a microphone here, and then this whole box here just stores all the data and has all the computational stuff. The difference about this acoustic monitor is that it only records very high frequency sounds, so not our voices. So if you see one of these up in the forest tonight and you're having a conversation with your friend, you don't have to worry. We're not spying on you. We're not recording any of your conversations. This only records bats' conversations because that's what we're interested in, because bats echolocate and they have a very, very high frequency sound. And so once we put one of these up, it'll tell us what kind of species are in the area. And we've done some very preliminary analyses of the acoustic monitors that we've put up in the South Bruce area. We found some very exciting results. 7 of the 8 species that live in Ontario actually call South Bruce area home, which is really exciting because that means South Bruce is a very species diverse area. And that's what we'd like to see. We want to see those areas where a lot of bat species intermingle, because that means that the populations are doing well and that there's a lot of safe habitat for these bats to live in. Now, acoustic monitoring is really great. It tells us a lot. Another thing that we found in the South Bruce area is that these bats seem to be congregating in these very swampy, forested areas. We don't have a lot of those kinds of areas here in Western or Eastern Ontario. So it's interesting to see those differences between where these bats are choosing to live, what habitats they like over in South Bruce, compared to the other places in Ontario. And it's interesting to see those different behaviors across the province, even though they're all the same species of bats. Now, acoustic monitoring is a great first step. It tells us exactly what species are in an area. Unfortunately, it has its limitations. It doesn't tell us exactly how many individuals are in a population, or how healthy they're doing, or anything like that. For example, if we have one night of recording and we've recorded 100 observations of big brown bats, that could mean that we had 100 big brown bats flying by the recorders each time once, or it could be one big brown bat flying by the recorder 100 times, just really likes that area. That's something we can't tell yet with this technology. We can't tell individuals. And so the next step we want to do when studying bats is to actually go out there and trap based on that location information of where the interesting species are. And so when we go out there, we put up a big net in the forest, basically. And when bats fly into it, we'll lower it as quickly as we can so we can take the bat out and not cause it too much stress. And we'll look at it. By looking at it, we can see what species it is. That confirms a lot of information that we only guess from the acoustic monitoring. But we can also tell whether it's a male or female, whether it's an adult or a juvenile, whether it has had babies anytime recently, and whether it's just doing healthy overall. That tells us so much more than acoustic monitoring can do. And so that's actually our next step. And we're hoping that next summer, we can use the data that we analyze over the winter from the acoustic monitoring to go trapping in the South Bruce area and see exactly how the bat populations are doing. So fingers crossed, and next summer we'll be doing something very fun like that and checking out the species populations over there. And so that's kind of it. I mean, thank you very much for joining us. I hope everybody has learned so much. If you want to learn more, please check out the Toronto Zoo's website at torontozoo.com/bats. There's a ton of information there about how to build a bat house, but the work that the Native Bat Conservation Program is doing, and how you can help at home as well. It's also, as Melissa mentioned, it is Bat Week this week. So we're celebrating bats all week until Halloween. And so if you want to learn more about that, you can check out batweek.org. There's plenty of activities you can download and things you can do to learn more about how you can become a bat ambassador. And don't forget to follow us on the social media. The Toronto Zoo has an excellent Facebook page, Instagram page, and Twitter page where we post very cute pictures of animals. We just had a red panda born, and she is adorable. We have a zebra just ready to pop. I'm going to have a baby of that soon, so check out Instagram. It's very cute. And don't forget to follow the Nuclear Risk Management Organization on all their social media channels as well. Without them, we wouldn't be here today. So I really want to thank Melissa for organizing this whole thing and Nuclear Risk Management Organization for making this whole thing happen. So thank you again for tuning in. I hope you learned a lot, and be safe.